All right. Hello, everybody. A little bit of a different setting today, but I wanted to try this out. This is me coming to you live from the co-working space that I usually work out of during the week, and just in one of the phone rooms here, just because if we're going to do these Friday afternoon live streams for my summer hours, this is really convenient for me. And so I wanted to see how it actually works for talking to you guys. So hopefully it comes through okay, sounds okay, looks okay. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Good to have you all here. I'm going to say hi to some folks in the chat. From Ontario, William, nice to see you here. Buddy, good afternoon. Nice to see you here from Waco, of course. Zane, thanks for tuning in. I know you're usually far away. And James from Vegas. And Brian, thank you guys for tuning in. George, another great smart home creator. Nice to see you here, George. Thanks for tuning in. William, thanks for tuning in. Good. I'm glad to hear, James. It sounds good and looks good so far. So, yeah. We got a lot of news to talk about this week and a lot of exciting stuff coming with next week, Apple's developer conference. Of course, if you keep an eye on the shorts that I post on the channel, you might have noticed that I posted a short this morning around the Nintendo Switch 2. So I have a Switch 2, been playing with it, and I have my rack video was kind of like my last big video. And my next big video that I'm working on is smart home related, but also revolves around Nintendo Switch 2 and kind of, I think, some cool smart home ideas, even if you're not necessarily into gaming, but even if you're just wanting some kind of entertainment related smart home automations, that I thought the Nintendo Switch 2 is a nice occasion to kind of update some of those things in my home and bring you guys along for the ride. So, I'm not sure exactly when that will come out at this point, probably after WWDC, but I'm working hard on that video. Been working hard on it for a while. A lot of companies have sent me some products for it. So very exciting video, and stay tuned for it. But yeah, Nintendo Switch 2, I have one because it's fun. I like to play it, but there is a smart home angle to it. So if you see in the future a Nintendo Switch 2 video from me around smart home stuff, realize as a core viewer of this channel that it's definitely a smart home video, and don't expect a review from me about the Switch. There are plenty of people who will do that, who do gaming reviews, and that's their thing. So, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. Mario Kart's really fun. Just the updated graphics are just such a big step forward for the Switch as a platform, I guess you could say. Yeah, I love some of the changes they've made to Mario Kart compared to the previous version. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, but it's probably enough on that because we got WWDC news to talk about. Yes, and yeah, John's mentioning that I got the Switch 2, so it's all part of a grand scheme for my channel, and thanks to support from viewers like you. So the big news that I'm sure you're really concerned about with WWDC is that Apple has released their playlists on Apple Music for WWDC, which is, I always think, a fun thing. As someone who used to be much more in touch with what music is cool, and in later year or more recent years, I just don't have time to keep up with that. I find the WWDC playlist as a time to refresh my knowledge of like cool new songs and albums. So basically the backstory on all of this is, if we go back to like WWDCs of the past, right? There's when I used to go to the conference when it was in the Moscone West Center in San Francisco, it was an actual conference with sessions throughout the week. And the Apple used to, of course, they were still very cool with music because they had the iPod and iTunes, but they used to play music between the different sessions as you're coming into the keynote, and then in and out of other sessions, they'd play different songs. And then people would kind of crowdsource the different music option, the different tracks they played and stuff. And you'd see playlists pop up on Spotify or shared other ways that would be kind of a recap. And it'd be fun as someone who went to the conference. Then you could kind of relive the memories by hearing those songs throughout the summer as you're working on code or whatever. So then I think a number of years ago, of course, with Apple having Apple Music now, they kind of took that over. And initially it was just one playlist, and then it expanded into multiple ones. And they have like a hello playlist and the main playlist, and they have a focusing work playlist, which is more like their pure focus playlist, kind of music without words. And then they have one that last year there was like a coffee shop theme as well. So anyways, they're actually, whether you're a developer or not, or care about WWDC a lot or not, they're fun playlists. And I imagine, I've not been to the newest, version of WWDC at Apple Park, but I imagine they play these songs there for various events there. But yeah, so I'd recommend checking them out. The main playlist only has 2 songs in it right now. So I don't know, maybe they'll add more songs after the event, the initial keynote happens. But the hello playlist has a bunch. The first few tracks are kind of like all over the place, but then it just kind of settles into some pop music. Of course, one from the new F1 movie soundtrack, which Apple is screening during on Tuesday night during the week for press. So I will not be going to WWDC, but of course I'll be keeping an eye on it in person. And that gets me to kind of what should we expect as smart home enthusiasts, people who like smart home tech. What is Apple going to do this year at WWDC? And the rumors are really not clear at this point of what's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to, chances are I don't think it's going to be a very big year for Apple Home. I think the fall potentially has some very interesting products coming. Apple TV, there's rumors of a new Apple TV model coming in the fall that could get pulled into the June time with WWDC potentially. But Ryan Christoffel over at 9 to 5 Mac had an interesting post just kind of positing, well, here's why Apple would want to release the HomePad, which is, of course, their new rumored smart display at WWDC. And I don't know if I really agree with him, but I think the idea that Apple would want to have developers making stuff for this new HomePad could make sense. The rumors were at first that this was going to be based a lot, as I've talked about in previous live streams, on the Intents architecture behind Siri, where basically apps can expose custom functionality to shortcuts and then also to Apple's voice assistant, and then that the new contextually aware Siri that was supposed to ship last year, I guess it was announced last year, it was supposed to ship this spring, never shipped. That was supposed to take advantage of those intents, and this display was supposed to be heavily based on that whole chain of automations and intelligence. But with that maybe fading out of the picture, and I'm guessing the hardware is close to ready, the question becomes like, what does the display do from a software perspective? And I've long thought it makes sense for this, like standby mode on your iPhone, to run various widgets that then you could interact with or see information with on the display. Now, my guess is if it would be something I'm looking out for at WWDC for Apple to do related to this is that they could. So on the Mac, you have the ability to run your iPhone widgets on your Mac desktop, and that's something they came out with a couple years ago. And I thought that was an interesting laying the groundwork of technology for something like this, where then you could give one of the widgets from your iPhone that you set up with an app on your iPhone and sort of give that over to the smart display, right? But from my understanding, the Mac widgets still to this day kind of require the iPhone to be on and like nearby to actually update, right? So it talks the iPhone in the background. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Apple makes some architectural changes there where somehow via intents and other kind of behind the scenes ways they package the widget in certain ways that you could somehow give it to your Mac and then your iPhone doesn't have to be there for that widget to update. And I think if that's the case, maybe that's already the case. I haven't tested all these like details, but like either way, I think that's a key thing that Apple could use to promote developers getting ready for the smart display without actually talking about the smart display. And Apple loves to do those kind of things at something like WWDC where they tend to drop hints of future technology without talking about it per se. And so I could see them doing something along those lines. So we'll see with kind of the new HomePad if maybe we'll see it at WWDC. Maybe it'll be announced. And one other rumor that kind of points to this is that Apple also announced the HomeOS, or not, Apple didn't announce this, but some folks discovered that what's probably a kind of shell corporation of Apple trademarked, and this is taking a minute to load. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. All right, here we go. Yeah, they trademarked HomeOS. So HomeOS is potentially the new name of Apple's operating system that encompasses the HomePod, Apple TV, as well as maybe some other future devices like a smart home display. Of course, there's also a lot of rumors around that tvOS 26 will get an update, a big update, like a lot of Apple's other platforms get this new glassy redesign. And I'm really impressed with the idea that it might actually support all the way back to the Apple TV HD. So basically the past 10 years of Apple TV would get these updates. So any of the ones that, have the grid of apps with the App Store on it, those would get this new tvOS 26 update. This is what I'm going to be keenly focusing on next week is what is Apple doing with tvOS, because I think it's a really big part of the smart home. And I think that there's a good chance that this is going to be the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on us as smart home users coming out of WWDC. There's a chance we'll hear about maybe some new Matter standards. Last year, of course, Apple talked about robot vacuums, which they've added to the Home app. They also had talked about the ultra-wideband locks, which is part of the Aliro standard from Matter. And that has, from my understanding, I think maybe hit some technical delays. It's certainly not shipped in the timeline that I think a lot of people had hoped for ultra-wideband locks supporting this technology. So maybe we'll hear more about that. But I also wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear anything about new Matter standard stuff, given that we had those things last year and the ultra wideband locks haven't shipped. So we'll see on the Matter side of things with Apple. Again, Matter being the shared smart home standard across Apple and a bunch of different brands that now, means that an accessory supporting Matter works across Apple Home and many other smart home platforms. So we'll see on tvOS, but it's definitely, I think, the area where we will see the biggest change as smart home users compared to the previous versions. And of course, if you haven't been following the broader Apple news, the 26 number is actually going to change. So it'll be sort of the releases for the 2026 year. So then everything will be in sync with the year, as opposed to version 18 or tvOS 19, I guess is what it would be otherwise. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But definitely some things I'm keeping an eye on. One other thing I wanted to call your attention, bring up here that I think you should keep an eye out for is, actually, hold on. I need to pull up something else for this, and then I'm going to get to some of your questions in the chat. So I see some of those coming as well. But this book by Patrick McGee, Apple in China. So I got this book right away when it came out. I think it was now like a couple weeks ago. And I finally got to starting reading it today. And they also have a good audiobook version as well, if that's what will work better for you. I would highly recommend checking it out. I'm already finding it really fascinating. I'm a couple chapters in. And John Gruber over at During Fireball interviewed the author Patrick McGee, who's actually been a long time writer at the Financial Times covering this space in technology and particularly Apple's supply chain for a while. So it's a very much an expert in this area prior to writing this book. And the book really pulls a lot of examples and stories, recent stories from Apple that we haven't heard as the public. So if you're into Apple and following sort of the news behind Apple and their supply chain and how it works, would highly recommend checking out this episode of the Talk Show podcast with John Gruber. And Patrick McGee's been doing a bunch of like kind of tour of podcasts and TV shows and things promoting the book. So there are other places you can find him. This is just the one that really intersected with, like stuff that I pay attention to. But I would highly recommend the book, either, physical, virtual, or audiobook form, whatever works for you. But definitely a book worth checking out this summer. And also a similar book, if you haven't looked at it as well, would be Chip War by Chris Miller. That is also a really good book I read a couple of years ago now, but it's still very much relevant. Let me pull up the what that looks like so you can see the cover. So this is the Chip War book. Really talks more about the chip supply chain coming from Taiwan and how that sort of shifted over the years from the U.S. to other countries. Very fascinating book as well. So, and both books, I get the impression, are really written from not necessarily like a partisan perspective either way, tend to be pretty hands off on the politics side and more just like reporting on kind of the events, and not very political books in my opinion. So, which I think is a good thing. So with that, I want to get to some of your questions here in the chat, and then we'll talk maybe more about WWDC. Would love to hear your thoughts too about things you're interested in hearing about or seeing what Apple does next week. I think mine is definitely the tvOS stuff. So, and hey, Robert from Australia, thanks for tuning in. Great to see you here. Oh, yeah. John's asking about the cameras. I can't tell based on the new router thing here if you're talking about maybe my Unify stuff. I definitely have a lot of Unify Protect cameras, and I'll be talking more about that on the channel soon. The Nintendo Switch camera, I think it's kind of a gimmick. I didn't get one, but I don't know. I think whatever. It's just not my thing. I do play sometimes online with friends, but I don't need video for that. Personally, I'm curious about what they're gonna do with the Pixelmator acquisition. Yeah, I would love to see Apple bring Aperture back. That was one of the things too, where earlier on in my life, that was one of the things that got me into photography. Was just kind of being a super fan of Apple at the time and just being really inspired by Aperture and all the stuff you could do. I love some of the concepts that Aperture had, like photo stacks, but I later heard from people who worked kind of tangential to that team that there was a lot of engineering struggles with that software stack, and I think maybe Pixelmator could combine with the new, like all the stuff they've done with photos and things, they could really take another stab at that kind of professional level photo tool. Because I mean, it's a funny thing, because you probably say to some executive at Apple, professional level photo tool. Well, there's so many people these days making their living with iPhone, shooting video and photos and posting that to various outlets. And I know Tyler Stallman, who's a YouTuber I follow, does a lot of commercial work and talks about how a lot of the shoots he does these days for social media for big brands, he has lots of different cameras he owns or could rent to do these shoots, but then they end up doing it on an iPhone because that's what feels natural to a lot of the modern day short form video and stuff like that. So, Yeah, I agree. The Home OS. What happened to Apple AI? Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, John. I think the biggest thing, of course, Apple Intelligence. There were some people, or someone wrote in, a knowledgeable source wrote into the Upgrade podcast recently to confirm that Apple does in fact update their models for Apple Intelligence separate from software updates. So the on-device models do get updated, which I think is pretty cool. That said, that's another thing, by the way, I'm really excited about as a developer, is the potential of those models. Initially, I was kind of skeptical about it, but I'm starting to get more interested about the possibility of Apple just opening up those Apple Intelligence models in various ways to developers. I think they have to be very careful about how that actually works with security issues around prompt injection and things like that. But being able to, like, for example, I mentioned before, I'm working on some kind of smart home app that might come out in the future. And one of the things I want to do there in certain cases is kind of describe the state of something in your smart home based on your devices, which is a huge variety of different possible inputs of stuff, right? And you can kind of make an algorithm that parses through some of that and gives you a reasonable sentence. But it's not going to cover all these random edge cases. And it'd be nice to have something like a large language model from Apple. It doesn't need to be super fancy or super powerful, but something that on device for free, could make a better description of what I'm trying to describe, in English or whatever language that the user can understand, not just some kind of technical smart home jargon. So yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. But I think the challenge that we've seen with Amazon as well had a big announcement around their contextual voice with their Alexa voice assistant, and they have talked about, we've shipped it, but have they really shipped it to a lot of people? It's I don't know anybody who has it, and I haven't seen a lot of videos on YouTube with firsthand experience of people using it. So we'll see there. I think that there's Apple, I think, kind of got bitten by that idea that other companies have also been bitten by of, we could do this contextual AI stuff. And basically meaning that, Siri on your phone could look at your emails and your search history and all kinds of other personal graph data about what you're doing on your phone and kind of piece all that information together in a response with, using retrieval augmented generation. I know this is kind of getting off into the weeds of technical stuff, but I've heard, I think it was John Siracusa described it this way on the External Tech Podcast, and I think this is a really apt description of basically going into last year's WWDC, I get the impression that Apple had this idea that kind of akin to probably what they've done on some other software features in the past, where it's all right, we're close on this thing, and if we just really stick the pedal to the metal, have a bunch of people work really hard over the next 6 months, we can actually ship this thing. And one of the struggles with AI and large language models is that the progress and the development isn't always that way, where it's not just a whole bunch of tickets in a Jira, tickets in an agile board where developers just pick them up and do them and get them done. If you just add more developers or have the developers work longer, you can get the thing done in a shorter amount of time and kind of pull a deadline in. That kind of idea is not as possible with AI, and I think Apple seems kind of hit a wall there with trying to do something, and it's all just speculation from the outside, right? But thinking that probably they've done in the past, where they pre-announce a feature and know they'll have to hustle to get it done, that they thought that about a lot of this Apple Intelligence stuff last year, and it just turned out to be a much more challenging problem than I think they thought. And I don't think we'll hear much about those issues at WWDC. I think it'll be a lot about just the newer things they're able to ship right now. Considering the iOS updates don't come until September, so that's 9 months into 2026, the plethora of people that are complaining about, yeah, I agree, George. It's just, you shouldn't call this iOS 25. it's going to be the 2026 operating system. It's released in the fall of 25. Most people don't get it until November, December, and it's basically 2026 at that point. Most people are going to be doing most of the, using of this operating system in 2026. So it's the 2026 operating system built in 2025, just like car years. A lot of cars for 2026 come out in the fall. So yeah, I think it makes sense if Apple does that. I would love to see them do that across products and software, just to make things so much easier, but we'll see what they actually choose. Oh, hey, Brett Tech. Thank you so much for joining. Fingers crossed I'm big time for Home OS. Yeah. And there's still references to the HomePod with a screen and tvOS. That's a good point, Brett. That was another place where people saw that in the past. And I wouldn't be surprised if beyond just the announcements from WWDC, there's things that slip out in the betas like that. I mean, Apple's gotten better at hiding those in recent years, but I think it's, yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good point. I was zeroing in on sort of Apple Intelligence being the like the LLM part of it, and that is only a small piece of it. And I don't love what they're doing. I mean, Image Playgrounds is like so far behind a lot of the competition that I almost think like there's a lot of tech that Apple doesn't do because they can't do. They know themselves that they wouldn't be like the leading player in that, or it's just not a business that they think makes sense for them to get into. Insert any number of different fields of technology that Apple does not make something in. But with that, I just don't understand why they did Image Playgrounds. I think Genmoji, though, on the other hand, is really cool and a clever way to sort of take that technology and fit it into something that I think really fits Apple more. But yeah, I mean, there's the writing tools, which are in a way LLM based, right? And I think that's a primary part of Apple Intelligence right now. And then also, the LLM tools around summarization. But a lot of the Apple Intelligence stuff around being contextually aware, like maybe some of that is driven by some kind of a language model of some kind, but I think it's layers of other things involved in there too. So, and hopefully we see some, Apple in certain ways maybe is, you certainly argue is behind in AI compared to other companies. They have a lot of smart people there, and I hope they can figure a lot of this stuff out because I think it would be really useful if your iPhone could do a lot of stuff. And I hope also would love to see, I mean, there's been rumors about Gemini, and the involvement from Google, as well as, they currently work with ChatGPT as well. I'd love to see some more opening up of some of the voice assistant stuff so that users could send requests to other services more easily than you can right now and access those APIs in more ways, but across the system. But we'll see about that. I mean, I think there's so much those companies could do with just shortcuts in general and do, there's ChatGPT shortcuts as well. So we'll see. Yeah, I mean, but they do have, Brett, private cloud compute as well. So they're doing some off of but you're right. It's much more secure than running something in the cloud. There's also some recent news I saw related to OpenAI now with a court order. Simon Willison, who reports a lot on kind of the AI world. And this is going off on tangents, not WWDC related, but the OpenAI has recently been demanded by a court order to retain logs of chat queries from users. So that will just stick around for potential reasons related to this court decision. So we'll see how that all shakes out in the end with the legal process. But for the time being, that's not great for any of your queries to ChatGPT. OpenAI are then, even if you delete them, I'm not sure, that's just all still sitting around there and not ever deleted. So nice to have private options, even if the power of compute in the cloud is so much greater than what we usually have on device these days. But Yeah, and you're right. It's the trade-offs of LLMs is definitely security. And by the way, if you're not familiar with Brett Tech's channel, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I know TikTok, I think, is where you're the biggest, but really cool technical deep dives on all kinds of fun projects. Does a lot of stuff around Apple and a lot of other tech as well. It was great to meet you and have dinner together out at CES, Brett. And so thanks for joining the live stream. It's great to see you here. So would highly recommend you guys go check out Brett's stuff wherever. So he's really smart guy. So. Yeah, I mean, I think, another thing related to this, John, I don't know if I'd say get behind, because I think what Apple did with their initial foundation of Apple Home was so far advanced in terms of locally running models and, or not models, crossing streams here, locally running all your commands to your smart home and doing encryption with setting up, you scan the HomeKit code, and that's moved into Matter. But I think that one of the challenges I think a lot of the smart home companies are having is that Home Assistant's becoming so good at like encompassing and being compatible with so many different things faster than companies can make deals and support things and do things. And I do kind of wonder how much is it going to be, back at that Apple in China book, one of the things it talks about in the beginning is just kind of the advantages IBM initially had with the PC and kind of this whole ecosystem of interchangeable parts and ways that different manufacturers could make PCs, not have to spend money on doing the operating system, of course, because of Windows. And that just led to so many more options in PCs and prices. And obviously we all kind of know how history ended up in the end, where of course, Apple has come out doing just fine in the end, and there's obviously benefits to having their kind of an integrated supply chain. However, I do kind of wonder if in the smart home space that's always going to be the case, and I think that something like a more open architecture where maybe some open source tools are able to pull together a lot of things and then expose it to platforms like Apple Home or Google Home or whatever other, platforms you want to use. It's still going to be local. It's still, for the most part, going to be secure as best as, any of us can tell. And so I do kind of wonder how much is the smart home going to just lose out to these closed platforms. Obviously, from a beginner perspective, starting with Apple Home is way easier than Home Assistant. But like, I see a lot of viewers on my channel who I see over the years, they'll get into Apple Home and then go to something like Home Assistant or Homey Pro or some other platform because it just opens up so much capability. I think that's where right now Apple doesn't really have an answer in that space, but I don't know if they really need one. I think that just what they're doing is completely fine, but I'd love to see some updates to some of their products, like what we were talking about earlier with Apple TV coming and HomePad. A lot of that would be a big improvement. But good discussion here in the chat. And Brian, thanks for your great replies. I do think, I know Denon has AirPlay support for some of their receivers, but I'm not sure about the Siri side. I think, as George is saying, Ecobee is the only company to do Siri on a device. Now, I tried that when I had an Ecobee thermostat, and it's fine, but it's not nearly as quick or as good of an experience as on a HomePod. I think there's some things Apple could do there to maybe, like, for example, using Apple's Assistant in CarPlay is really good. And I love how they've updated the interface in CarPlay to have the new sort of UI for it and the cards they show and everything. It's all very well done. And of course that's running in CarPlay, but then in a car that's not made by Apple, of course. And so I think there's something there that maybe Apple could kind of improve some of that experience and get more partners on board with doing their voice assistant in more places, because that's going to be a huge factor in getting new users to want to use Apple Home and not other platforms, is that they can talk to their assistant right there in their home. So the other thing that's important to keep in mind too with WWDC every year is just like, it can kind of feel kind of boring if you're not doing anything with the technology as like a developer. There's a lot of times the seeds of things like Apple Home Key or robot vacuum support that are really exciting to think about, but like you can't really do anything with them right when they're announced. Sometimes there are ways you can do it, but especially with the Apple, the home stuff, a lot of times then you need to update all your or at least update your primary home controller to the beta operating systems, which I do not recommend doing. I've done that in the past, and I probably will in the future to cover stuff for you guys. But if you're not into covering this for, YouTube or whatever other social media, like it's not worth the trouble to install the betas for your smart home. Maybe put the beta on your iPad or iPhone or something to check it out and play with, but I don't recommend doing it for your smart home. It's going to create bugs and just cause all kinds of issues because it's beta software. It's not meant for people to run prime time full tilt yet. So it's meaning. But then with that, if you don't install the new betas on your Apple Home hubs or controllers, that's not that you're not going to get a lot of the new features. So, and then also, of course, there's the Matter component, and a lot of times there's hardware support required for a lot of these things, like Apple Home Key or robot vacuum support, and others. So, we'll see what happens, but just keep that in mind that a lot of times it can help you understand what's coming in the smart home space, but it's not going to be stuff that you can like install tomorrow. Hopefully it'd be fun to get some new hardware, but I wouldn't expect it. There is one other fun little anecdote I wanted to pull up that was related to a past WWDC that kind of relates to smart home tech. And I ran across this photo the other day, and so back, I was mentioning earlier the whole idea of Apple doing like the in-person version to WWDC back in the day in Moscone West in San Francisco. And one of the things they used to have there, and this is a picture of it from 2011, but they had this multiple years, was the sort of a Wi-Fi heat map, which of course nowadays you can get with Unify or lots of other tools in your home. And but this was, I don't know, I'm guessing this is Cisco stuff, given how much Apple works with Cisco, but I thought this was pretty cool. So this is basically like a map of the convention center in Moscone West and like the different hotspots where the Wi-Fi is being used, and they had these screens sort of updating in real time, or more or less real time, about the Wi-Fi usage at different places. Because of course, if you remember back in like 2011, Wi-Fi wasn't what it is today in terms of handling the capacity of devices. Famously, there was, I think, the iPhone 4 announcement. There was so much wireless interference from different things, people tethering, people using Wi-Fi, whatever, in the Moscone Presidio keynote hall, that like Steve's demos of the iPhone 4 were failing. And so he asked everybody to turn off their tethering devices or whatever. And in that, you can probably find the videos of that. But anyways, I always thought this kind of heat map of Wi-Fi was pretty cool. It's like, it'd be amazing to have a screen like this in your home. And of course, you could kind of build one out with maybe Unify or some kind of custom home assistant dashboard or something. But pretty cool tech idea that was just kind of fun to like go watch and see, well, it has the Wi-Fi in a particular part of the building. So, yeah. Let me go back to the chat here. I'm sorry, J Core. I'm gonna ask you to go because it's not, what you're saying isn't making sense. Apple's found Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that, John. But there's always new security stuff. Oh, yes. This is another thing I've heard too, Brian, that via Mark Gurman, that Apple is going to add some like generative shortcuts, which I think would be pretty cool. So essentially around, sorry, the AC might get some background noise here. I think some AC or something is kicking on. But generative shortcuts basically meaning you could describe in plain language what you want to have the shortcut do, and then it can figure out how to do it. And I think this is maybe a good sort of half step toward the contextual Siri, because then with something like this, it's starting to put together app intents that it could use to accomplish a task. And of course, it's done in a way where the user's modifying it and kind of creating as a routine that's done over and over. But like you could see how then from there, it's then like another half step to go from, well, the user just told me all of this stuff and I'm just going to make a thing behind the scenes. It's kind of like a shortcut, do the action and then tell the user the result. So I agree. I think that kind of generative shortcut stuff would be really cool. So we'll see if that actually comes. I think Apple's kind of wary to announce things that they're not confident will ship soon, given last year, but you never know. Let's see. There's something else I wanted to bring up related to that. Now it's slipping my mind. I'll probably think of it later, but let's see. Got the tvOS. We talked about the HomePad. We talked about that. Let's see. We talked about the Switch 2. Oh, another fun thing about, you might not realize this, but the rumor is after that iPhone 4 announcement was sort of the instigator for this, the reason for it. But one fun fact about iOS devices you might not be aware of is if you get a USB-C to Ethernet adapter, or even back in they still make, I think we probably find somewhere, a Lightning to Ethernet adapter, you can actually connect your iPad or iPhone via Ethernet. So it doesn't actually use Wi-Fi for the internet. And there can be any number of like edge case reasons why you'd want to do that. But maybe if you're wiring up a smart home display or something else, especially if you're docking an iPad at a desk or something where you're taking a bunch of meetings, it could be kind of nice to have a wired connection for your internet. And of course, iOS supports that. So just something to keep in mind that you might not think of is that iOS devices can use Ethernet. I don't know what the limits are in terms of like 2.5 or 10 gig Ethernet on that, but the iPad Pro support Thunderbolt, so I presume like a Mac they would support the faster Ethernet speeds, but I've not tried that. I've not tried that myself. So let's see. Some loud background noise. Okay. Well, this has been a fun live stream. I'm looking forward to next week when we get to hear all about this news from Apple. And I'm not sure exactly when you'll be hearing. I should have a video, I think, post on Wednesday. We'll see. I'm kind of still feeling out what makes sense based on the news of how I cover it and when and what I say when, where. So stay tuned to my channel. Now, as you know, if you're a regular viewer of my live streams, I like to close out the live streams with a video recommendation of another YouTube video that I think is worth checking out after this live stream is over. So today we're gonna, because Father's Day is around the corner. If you're into cameras, Jason Vong had a really funny video. He did a collaboration with some other YouTubers around cameras for dads, and he a little bit of stereotypes and stuff, but like really funny versions of like different cameras for different types of people who might be a dad looking for a camera. So Yeah, I'm going to paste this in the chat. Oops. There we go. Copy link. There we go. Okay. Yes. So there's the YouTube video. Recommend you go check it out if you're interested in cameras. And even if you're not, or you're happy with your current camera or, iPhone, it's a funny video. So a good watch. But in the meantime, I'll see you next week. Have a good weekend.